Hey, I want to share with you something that Andrew Carnegie had happen when he was a kid, America's very first billionaire, the father of modern philanthropy, that every single one of us could do, and most of us don't. So stay tuned on this week's Finance Friday. Hey, Jerry Fetta here, CEO of Philanthro Wealth. Welcome back to Finance Friday. So just really quickly as you're watching this, as you know, I've been going through The Gospel of Wealth by Andrew Carnegie. And the first part of this book is his biography. So those that are just tuning in, you don't know who Andrew Carnegie is. Andrew Carnegie is the epitome to me of what wealth should look like, right? So he's America's first billionaire, came here as a first generation immigrant, grew up poor, and had the goal or the postulate to build massive wealth and to help people, right? And so he wanted to give all of his wealth away before he died, and he actually managed to do that. So if you go look at Carnegie and you just Google that name, you're going to see universities, you're going to see libraries, you're going to see theaters, schools, gymnasiums, you name it, right? I was driving through Oklahoma a couple months ago, and we ran past a Carnegie library in the middle of nowhere in Oklahoma. So this is someone that I look at this and I'm like, okay, this is what the ideal picture would be, because we all can agree that most of us don't want to be like that wealthy, greedy, evil person. We read about people like the Rockefellers, right? And not to say they didn't do their share of philanthropy, but the storyline isn't great. Putting psychiatry in schools and funding the pharmaceutical industry and taking small oil businesses and basically price gouging them down to the bottom and making them go bankrupt and then raising the prices back up. Like that was the kind of practice that was there. So I think when most of us think wealth, we want to think of an ideal, right? Like I want to be wealthy so I can help people. And that's why the company is called Philanthro Wealth. It's about being more and doing good, right? So as I was reading this week on Gospel of Wealth, you know, we're still in the very beginning stages of this book. And he's talking about, Mr. Carnegie is talking about his childhood. And I thought it was so interesting because, you know, for me, I'm a newer parent now. So I've had my experience as a kid. I'm now looking at this as, you know, an adult, raising a kid, and I'm reading about Carnegie's experience. And there were some very key things that I wanted to share that I think as a parent are extremely important. And again, it's going to maybe disagree with some of the stuff that our culture in modern times tells us, right? But I want to, again, focus on the result. So the first thing that I noticed is he dedicated the book to his mom. Right, so you read the opening lines and he's talking about his mom from the get-go. He's like, his mom is the most special person he's ever met, right? And so I want to preface that because the things that I'm going to share here on today's Finance Friday are based on the fact that the end result is he really loved his parents, right? Because you might hear some of these things and you're like, oh, that's too forceful, that's too rough, that's too much, that's too big, too whatever, too tough. And the reality is that he's saying, hey, because of the way I was raised, like I'm thankful to my parents for it, right? And if that's the result of the person after you've put them through whatever experience you've put them through, it's probably a pretty good result. Now, we also have to look at where is Andrew Carnegie at in his adult life. And he actually becomes arguably one of the most successful people in American history. He becomes America's first billionaire. He gives all of it away. He's benevolent. He's helpful, right? So for anyone that's a parent and you're looking at, okay, what result do I want to create? What's the effect I want to create with a kid that turns into an adult? That's a pretty good one. Next, I don't want to interrupt you too long. I just want to give you a free offer for my book, The Blueprint to Financial Freedom. If you go to jerryfetta.com/B2F promo, you can get the book now. I'm going to let you get back to the video. Right? It's hard to argue with that. So he starts the book out and he's like, you know what, dedicating it to his mom. And the first couple of chapters are all about his uncles and his grandparents and these people that he grew up with. And I thought it was really interesting because he really idolized, people like William Wallace and Bruce and these Scottish people in history that fought for freedom. And I thought that was really interesting because later on in life, he pursues financial freedom. And he helps other people become more free. And so I think, if you're a parent, and even if you're an adult, maybe you're not a parent, but especially if you're a parent, instilling in your kids that freedom is important. Standing up for what's right is important. Putting your name and your life on the line for the things that matter, that's important. Okay? Because we live in a society today that, in my opinion, it's soft. It's very soft. There's a lot of just like self-coddle, self-sympathy, avoiding hard things, trying not to be uncomfortable, gravitating toward comfort, and it creates a weak society. And I think a weak society steals the future from our generations to come, right? We're not going to do anything difficult. We're just going to live in the now and have all the stuff we can have at the cost of them. And that's what's happening in today's culture is like, we're using, debt and taxation and inflation and all of these mechanisms to have all the ease without any of the work. And we're going to put all the work on the next people. And their lives are going to be harder because of it. So Carnegie grew up like learning about people like William Wallace and like what's right and what's not right and standing for what you believe in and being willing to be, jailed or die for it. Right. And I think that was something when I started reading these chapters, I was like, wow, I don't see that is the case anymore. And in fact, what I see instead is, if I see a problem, let's say it's an injustice, for example, and I'm like, that's wrong. That's wrong. Let's do something about it. And I am going to rally. I am going to lead. I am going to step up into the front of the lines and put myself at risk to correct the injustice. That's one thing. Okay. That's someone like a William Wallace, right? Which is awesome. You watch the movie Braveheart and you're like, that's an incredible story. I think there's a big difference between me pointing out to a group of people, you're being taken advantage of, you're victims, you're marginalized. You should go do something about it. I'm going to stay back here though and keep living the lavish life and just egg you guys on and stir up controversy, and I'm not actually going to lead the charge. Okay, the second one I don't have a lot of respect for, and that's what I see happening with today's culture is we don't have these Carnegies and William Wallaces and even like the United States, the founding fathers, right? Those are people who, if you read their stories, the guys who signed the Declaration of Independence, most of them were jailed, tortured, killed, driven into poverty. And these were doctors and lawyers and pretty upscale, high society people who put their lives on the line for freedom. So Carnegie's learning about this, right? Now, I thought it was also interesting. He didn't start school until he was 9. Right. And so before that, like he was, working, he was at home, he was doing kid stuff, all these kinds of things. But, it was a very different lifestyle. It was the woods. It was being out in the streets with the other kids. It was, playing outside. And so I think that type of childhood where you're out in nature and in the elements and in life and learning rather than like today, you might be in a school all day long, or you might be in a 1,200 square foot apartment with nothing other than just TV and video games if you're a kid, right? So Carnegie had this very active childhood. So he's always out doing stuff. He's always learning. He's always observing. And so you'll see this in the first few chapters. And I think those are things that we can create, right? We can create those. If you're a parent, like, okay, like prior to TV, what did kids do? It's not an entitlement. It's not a necessity of life. Why is it being used so much? Because we're failing to let kids be kids, right? They should be out scuffing their knees up and getting dirty and getting injured and all of those types of things. That's what kids do, particularly boys like Carnegie. That's how I grew up, right? I don't know about you, but if I would have grown up where it's like I'm inside all day, TV all the time, right? Just going from class to class and this and that, and I didn't have this adventure, like going out and actually doing stuff, I don't think I would have turned out the same, right? Like it's just a completely different world. Now, when he did start learning and getting into school, prior to all of that, like they were basically living in Scotland, right? And so he got into school at age 9 and basically he was delaying it. Like the other kids got into school sooner. They were interested in it. He wasn't. It wasn't until he started actually socializing with the other kids and making friends and stuff. And then he wanted to go to school. And I think that's an important component too, right? Like why would someone want to learn, right? Especially if they're like 9 and they're like, why do I need to know what the inside of a frog looks like, right? Or math. Like these things don't quite make sense yet. I think when you have a peer group and it's like, that's what the other kids are doing and there's some camaraderie and group there, I think that's one of the things that motivates someone to want to be involved in something. Whether the activity is a sport or school or whatever, it's the group aspect. Okay, and so that group aspect really kicked in, but he only stayed in school until the age of 13. So when he was around 12 or 13, they moved from Scotland to America. right? His family grew up in poverty, downright poverty. And his dad was always working a lot, barely making it. His mom, had kids. She was also working. She had businesses. And so this was somebody, Andrew Carnegie as a boy, this was somebody who watched with his own family in real life and experienced what does poverty look like? What does the struggle feel like? What does it mean to not be able to afford stuff? Right? And they weren't like homeless or anything like that, but it wasn't an easy life. And he was well aware of that as a kid. Right? Like he was well aware of the fact that his dad was always working, trying to put food on the table and barely making it. He was well aware of the fact that his mom was creating businesses on the side to supplement the income in addition to being a mom. He was well aware of the fact that they didn't have the same money that other people had. And I think this is an important element because in order to want freedom, you have to have some level of experience of the opposite. And so someone who grows up in the comfort of like the upper middle class and they've got no problems and they've never had to struggle and everything is given to them and whatever they want, it's there and they don't have to worry about how it got there. It's just like, oh, food shows up. Oh, clothing shows up. Oh, these things show up, right? I think that really, again, reinforces a weak culture. It just creates weakness is what it does. Because somebody produced all of that, right? And I think as a parent, it's really important to tie that in with your kids. The food doesn't just show up. You work for it, right? The mortgage isn't just there and paid. That house that you live in, you made that happen, right? And tying those together to see like this comes from production and this comes from work. And this is something that we put a lot of effort and energy into in order to have, even if you've got a comfortable environment. Doesn't mean you can't have comfort, but understanding and having reality on how that condition got created. Because here's what I think happened in the last couple of generations. I think the more and more modern day America got into the middle class, the more and more you had people who just had luxuries that didn't exist before. If you think about some of the poorest people today have more luxuries than the wealthiest kings 200, 300, 400 years ago. There wasn't a king in the world 400 years ago who had an iPhone that could watch anything they want to watch and know anything they want to know. Or air conditioning, right? Or access to like food where you just pop into a grocery store and even if you don't have money, you swipe a card and somehow you have food. And so there's some benefit to comfort and ease, but I think that made people soft. And so we have this, instead of this angst of like, I need to achieve more, I need to improve my condition, I need to climb up into a better state of life and build wealth. I think today's people are more almost like a critic, like, oh, that wasn't quite good enough for my taste. Like a food critic. It's like, well, you can't even cook the dish. What are you criticizing my food for? Right? You've never experienced what it means to go in the kitchen. You've never experienced what it means to, learn the recipe. And so I think the more we've had stuff given to us, the more we've kind of turned it into entitlement. And we don't have the same push and drive and determination that someone like Carnegie does. And those who do typically had tough childhoods. They typically had lots of, struggle. There was resilience that they built up at a young age. They didn't have much handed to them, and they realized how to work hard. Okay, this is like, for me, if you ask me, what's my opinion on this? The most successful quality out there, other than creative imagination, is the ability to do whatever amount of work it takes to get where you need to go. And so Carnegie, he talks about this, the creative imagination piece. He grew up with the Scottish, fairy tales and folklore and the magic of that environment. I talked about that in one of my previous videos. And so he had the experience of this creativity and imagination combined with the realism of the work it actually takes to survive. And so when they moved to the United States, prior to that, they were in Scotland, they weren't super well off, right? But moving to the United States for them was the chance to escape into freedom. Newly forming country, lots of opportunity. And so they sold everything they had. They sold their businesses. They sold all their materials for those companies. They sold most of their possessions, right? And they still came up short. And so not only did they sell everything and use every last penny they had to move to the United States, they had to borrow money from people who were close to their family in order to fund the difference. And so when they arrived here, in the most literal sense of the word, they had nothing. They arrived to the United States, the land of opportunity, worse off financially than they were in Scotland. Right? But the sentiment was, here, at least you've got a shot. At least you can be somebody. Right? And I think that that's such an important thing. I don't want to tie this into politics or any of that. I just want to go into the spirit of, like, you know, if you're watching this and you live in America, it's a great history. Right? That still exists today. People still come here because they can be somebody. Right? And I think, you know, that was true in Carnegie's day as a kid. He saw that. And I think that today that's true, and it's kind of downplayed. Right? So the qualities, if you're a parent that I'm, you know, kind of watching, you know, what Carnegie's doing, I'm also looking at my experience as a kid. I grew up very similar. We had very little. You know, we had, you know, free food bank food, free lunch. I watched bugs crawl through my cereal. The car got taken away. The house got taken away. We were homeless a couple of times. And so when I look at that, you know, I'm like, okay, I understand what's actually out there. Hey, you want to see a magic trick? Get a copy of my book, Blueprint to Financial Freedom. I know it's in front of my chest and my face because I want you focusing on the book and not me for a moment before you go back to focusing on me and the content. Growing up, I experienced those things, and that's something I can relate to with Andrew Carnegie. Is that's an advantage that I have. I've been there. I'm not afraid of it. I've confronted that before. At a very young age, I confronted it. And I confronted, you know, Gandhi says poverty is the worst form of violence. I've confronted the violence that comes out of that. Right? The force that's placed on you when you don't have economic freedom. You don't have the same choices. You don't have the same abilities because you lack economically. And that for me was always a motivating factor. Right? And so I think as I'm going over this chapter, you know, I'm looking at this and I'm like, okay, as an adult, right, I can embrace those aspects of work ethic, creative imagination, and even with like the schooling back then, it was so interesting. He was learning, you know, reading, writing, math. He was learning how to, you know, like create code languages and stuff, you know, basically like creating, I forget the name of it, but there's a specific name for this, of creating code, right? Not like computer code, but writing encryptic messaging and like some of those cool things, right? That was something he was learning in school. And then it was a lot of just normal skills, talking, communication, right? Being able to write, being able to read, being able to use math and logic to solve problems. And it didn't get far beyond that realm. And I'm not saying he didn't get further educated down the line, but I think a lot of the stuff that our kids learn in school today is not applicable, right? Like if I'm, you know, 10 years old and you start teaching me like how to measure the inner angles of triangles, and I'm not interacting with triangles on a daily basis, I'm probably not going to retain that information because it's not applicable, right? Now, in 5 years, might it be if I decide that that's the route I want to go? Absolutely. But I think that the focus on, can you look someone in the eye and communicate? Can you persuade? Can you get your point across? Can you understand other people? Can you read? Like, can you look at something and really be literate and understand what you're looking at? Can you write and communicate in that form as well? Right? Can you do math? Can you look at a problem and be able to solve it? Like, I think those were elements in Carnegie's upbringing. With the little education he had, you can see that that stuck and really gave him traction. Okay, so like my thought on this is that those are healthy elements to introduce not only to your own environment, but if you're a parent, to your kids' environments. Like kids should work. They should absolutely work. They should earn stuff. They should see what does it take to create the life that we have? What does it take to create the life that we want? Because I believe if you don't do those things and you don't instill those qualities and show that that's a real part, you're doing a disservice to your children when they grow up. You're creating people who are unprepared for what the world is really going to be like. And then it's just more people who can't keep a job and end up needing government subsidies, and then taxes go up and inflation goes up, and all of this stuff happens as a result of that, because in the home, we didn't take responsibility for making the environment dangerous enough for someone to need to learn to survive. We can't take all the danger out of the environment, right? If we do that, it's like, okay, that's not real. That's not how life actually works. And again, that goes back to creating a culture of weak people. Okay. And I think, the real strength in this is because Carnegie confronted this stuff as a kid, he was willing to have empathy for those who were going through it as an adult. He had reality on that. He knew what it meant to be hungry. He knew what it meant to not be able to pay for things. And he was very benevolent as a result of that. And so I think if you can go through an experience like that and come out the other end stronger, more imaginative, harder working, but also with a heart to understand what it means and how to help other people get through the same thing, I think that's what it's about. So in this chapter of Gospel of Wealth, we've not even gotten into Carnegie's adulthood, but just the foundation of the childhood, right? And the amount of credit that he gives to his mom, particularly to his parents, to his upbringing, and really being transparent with the struggle. And not in like a tiny violin, like, oh, look at me, I was poor and now I'm not, right? Like we've all heard that story too many times at conferences and events, but just to show like that this is what it was like. This is what it was like. This is the upbringing. This is the formative years. This is the foundation. And I can really see how that ties into the greater man that we learn about and we will read about as I continue with more chapters in this book. So, moral of the story, guys, embrace difficulty. Embrace the hard stuff, right? If you don't die from it, you're going to come out better. And I know that's cliche, but it's true. Like your ability to withstand force and barriers and problems and difficulties, that is the direct correlation of what you're actually made of. If you fold easy, if you're, I can't handle this, and you're seeking sympathy, or you're giving yourself sympathy, or, you're feeling bad for yourself, or you're avoiding it, it's weakness. It's weakness, and it takes strength to build wealth. You think that the wealthy on this planet, the ones that we don't admire, okay, the ones that are doing the wrong stuff on this planet with their money, do you think they're not strong? No, absolutely they're strong. They're extremely strong. They're extremely intelligent. They just have bad intentions. They're misanthropic instead of philanthropic. And so if I'm like, I want to make the world a better place with my wealth, but I don't have mental fortitude and the same strength and the same intelligence, and I'm just like, well, I'm just going to do it on my own good intentions, I'm sorry, but you're mismatched. You don't have the other boxes checked that they have. Right? The difference between you and someone like that isn't that they have bad intentions and you have good ones. It's that they're stronger and smarter and have bad intentions. And you've got to have the same or better in the strength category. You've got to have the same or better in the intellect category and have that extra ingredient of good intentions in order to do something like Carnegie did. So I hope that this gives you some insight. I hope it inspires you to read the book Gospel of Wealth by Andrew Carnegie. I don't make any money on you reading that. I just think it's a phenomenal book, and it's a really good story of a real life example, someone that started at the bottom. So we can't pull this like, oh, he had some kind of benefit or advantage or privilege. No, the guy was a first generation immigrant that grew up in poverty, didn't even finish school, dropped out at 13 years old. So he had a full 4 years of schooling and zero advantages, and he still became who he was. If he can do that, all of us can. So thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe. I'll see you next time. Hey, this is Jerry Fetta here. I want to thank you for watching my video, watching my content. I hope you enjoyed it. If you would like to learn more about the blueprint to financial freedom and how you can achieve passive income that exceeds your savings, your expenses, your taxes, your generosity, and build wealth like the top 1%, I want to encourage you, grab a copy of my book, The Blueprint to Financial Freedom. You can go to jerryfetta.com/B2F promo, or you can click the link in the description of the video here. The copy is free. You cover your shipping. We'll send the book out to you, and we'll send you an email with a bunch of great bonus material also for free. Get the book, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you on my next content.